In 1968, a scientist built paradise. Not a metaphor for paradise, an actual one. Unlimited food, unlimited water, perfect temperature. He put 8 mice inside and closed the lid. 5 years later, every single one of them was dead. And not one of those deaths had a medical explanation. The mice that survived long enough to die of old age left nothing behind them. John Calhoun called it Universe 25. He was a behavioral scientist at the National Institutes of Health, and he had one question that consumed him. What happens to a society when survival is no longer the problem? Life was hard. You struggled to eat, to stay warm, to avoid being killed. So he built a series of enclosed universes and populated them with rats and mice. He gave them everything they needed. He placed 8 founders inside, the healthiest specimens from the breeding colony. For the first 104 days, almost nothing happened. The founders explored. They established territories. They worked out who slept where and who deferred to whom. It was ordinary mouse life, just inside a very clean box. Then the first litters arrived, and the population began to double. Every 55 days, twice as many mice as before. It was exactly what you would expect when you remove every threat to survival. Birth rates went up, death rates went down. By day 315, there were 620 mice inside the enclosure. This is the moment Calhoun had been waiting for. Not because anything catastrophic happened on that day, but because 620 mice was approximately the number of stable social roles the enclosure could support. Every territory had been claimed, every hierarchy had been established, every available position in the social structure was filled. There was no room for the next generation to become anything. And that is where the experiment stopped being about mice. Even though food was available everywhere throughout the enclosure, equally distributed across multiple feeding stations, the mice began crowding compulsively around just a few of them. Not because the other stations were empty, the mice simply refused to eat alone. The social act of eating had become so deeply wired into their behavior that an isolated feeder, no matter how full it was, felt wrong to them. Eating required an audience, and so they crowded. Dozens of mice pressing together at a single station, while the others sat untouched. In normal mouse society, feeding is organized by dominance hierarchy. The dominant animals eat first. Others wait their turn. The hierarchy creates order. But when you compress hundreds of animals into a space designed for far fewer, the hierarchy collapses under its own weight. There are too many animals and not enough positions. The system breaks. What replaced it was chaos. It began to produce behavioral disintegration. The young males who could not establish territory and could not win a place in the existing hierarchy did not simply wander the enclosure randomly. They sorted themselves into 2 distinct groups. The first group became hyper-aggressive. These were the mice that attacked without provocation, that disrupted other animals' nesting, that skipped the courtship rituals every other mouse still followed. They moved fast and erratically through the enclosure. They forced themselves into spaces they had not earned. Violence was their response to a world that had no place for them. But the second group went in the opposite direction entirely. They withdrew. They drifted toward the center of the enclosure and collected in large, listless pools. They did not fight. They did not court females. They did not attempt to build or defend territory. When attacked by aggressive males, they did not fight back. They would absorb the assault, stand up, walk a few feet away, and lie down again. They had no fights to win, no females to court, no territory to hold. They had been born into a world where every role was already taken, and so they opted out. Not with violence, not with despair in any recognizable sense, just a slow, quiet removal. Calhoun watched them for hours from the observation platform above the enclosure. He had never seen anything like it in the previous 24 experiments. But Universe 25 was big enough, and clean enough, and controlled enough that you could see it clearly. A portion of the population had simply stopped participating. While the males were splitting, the females were doing something equally disturbing. The mothers who were still trying to raise young found themselves in an impossible situation. The male partners who had originally defended their nesting space grew too exhausted from constant social disruption to continue protecting their families. Protection duty fell to the mothers alone. The mothers began to fail. They abandoned pups in scattered locations around the enclosure. Some forgot which pups belonged to them entirely. Others stopped recognizing their own offspring at all. In those sections, fewer than 1 in 20 newborn mice survived to weaning. The pups that did survive were raised by mothers who were barely present, in a colony where no functioning adult male existed to model what normal mouse behavior looked like. They grew up watching nothing, and when they reached adulthood, they became something Calhoun had never seen in any previous experiment. They never tried to mate. They never attempted to establish territory. They never engaged in any social behavior at all. They ate when they were hungry. They slept when they were tired, and they groomed themselves, obsessively, constantly, with extraordinary care. Their fur was perfect. Because they had never been in a single fight, never had any reason to be, they showed none of the scarring that marked the other adult males. They moved through the colony as though no other mouse existed. They looked, externally, like the healthiest animals in the entire enclosure. Calhoun named them the beautiful ones. They were also, by every measure that mattered, already dead. They could not be induced to mate. Placed with receptive females in separate enclosures, they showed no interest. Their nervous systems had developed inside a world where every social role was occupied by someone else. And they had simply never learned to want the roles that were left, which was nothing. On day 560, the population of Universe 25 peaked at 2,200 mice. It would never go higher. On day 920, the last successful conception inside the enclosure took place. After that, no new mice were born. The beautiful ones kept grooming. The colony kept aging, and one by one, with no replacements coming up behind them, the mice died. On May 23, 1973, 4 years and 10 months after Calhoun sealed the lid, the last mouse in Universe 25 died. When the results were published, the world ran with the obvious lesson. Overpopulation kills. Comfort destroys. A life without struggle is a life that unravels itself. Religious leaders used it. Politicians used it. Environmentalists used it. Every person who had ever wanted to warn about the softening of modern life found something in those mice they could use as a weapon. The image of the beautiful ones, physically perfect, functionally extinct, became one of the most cited metaphors of the second half of the 20th century. But that was not what Calhoun concluded. Not even close. His actual conclusion was sitting right there in his published paper in his own words, and almost nobody read it carefully enough to understand what he was saying. He wrote that the cause of death inside Universe 25 was not comfort. It was not abundance. It was not even overpopulation in the simple physical sense. It was the exhaustion of meaningful roles. The enclosure had a finite number of positions that a mouse could occupy with purpose: dominant male, subordinate male, mother, nesting pair. Each of these roles carried with it a set of behaviors, challenges, and social functions that gave an individual mouse a reason to participate in the life of the colony. When the population grew faster than the supply of those roles, the surplus animals had no place. Not in a physical sense, there was plenty of physical space. In a social and psychological sense, there was nothing for them to be. And when there is nothing for you to be, Calhoun argued, the system that makes you a functioning member of a species simply does not develop. You become a beautiful one, healthy, groomed, gone. The food never ran out. The water never ran out. What ran out was something nobody had thought to put in the paradise to begin with, something to do that mattered. Calhoun was not a doomer. He did not spend the last decades of his career pointing at Universe 25 and saying, "This is what happens to us." He spent them asking a different question. What would have to be different? He kept building new universes. He kept changing the variables. He introduced more complex environments, more varied social structures, more opportunities for what he called creative interaction. He was looking for the single intervention that would let a population survive the point where physical roles ran out. He believed he found the direction of the answer. He called it conceptual space. Calhoun's argument was that physical space has limits. A 9-foot enclosure can only support so many social roles before it runs out. But ideas do not work that way. Concepts, art, science, philosophy, technology, these are forms of space that do not fill up the same way. Every new idea creates new roles for people to occupy. Every new field of knowledge requires people to master it, teach it, argue about it, extend it. He called the process ideational generativity, the continuous creation of new reasons to participate, new things to be. Look at the data from Universe 25 one more time. The hyper-aggressive males who destroyed social structure without building anything. The males who withdrew into listless pools and stopped participating entirely. The beautiful ones who groomed themselves to perfection and could not be induced to engage with the world. The mothers who could not maintain the basic transmission of care that kept the species going. None of these were caused by scarcity. All of them were caused by the disappearance of meaningful roles in a world that provided everything except a reason to matter. Now look around. The data on male disconnection in America. the rates of social withdrawal, the rise of elaborate grooming, and self-presentation as substitutes for social participation, the documented collapse of mentorship and modeling between generations, the declining birth rates in the highest resource environments on Earth. This video is not going to tell you that you are a mouse. You are not. You have something the mice never had: the ability to recognize the pattern, name it, and choose something different. But Calhoun spent 40 years trying to figure out what would have to change inside Universe 25 to produce a different result. He never fully solved it. He died in 1995, still working on the problem. What he was certain of was this: the answer was not less abundance. It was not manufactured hardship. It was not a return to scarcity. It was the creation of new roles worth inhabiting, new things to master, new problems that genuinely needed solving. Not busy work, not grooming. Real engagement with something that exists beyond yourself and requires you to show up differently than you did yesterday. The mice didn't have a choice. They couldn't build conceptual space. They couldn't invent new reasons to participate. When the physical roles ran out, there was nowhere left to go. We still have somewhere to go. The question Calhoun left us with isn't whether paradise can kill you. It's whether you're spending your time in it building something or just making sure your fur looks perfect.